Good morning and welcome to a very early edition of Pensar Basketball Live. It is 8:30 a.m. We are starting almost on time. Hope you grab your coffee and let's get to it. We're going to be talking about the Raptors creating or recreating Fred VanVleet in the aggregate. I happen to think that Fred VanVleet, for all the stuff that we've said about him on this channel, a lot of the stuff that the Raptor fans feel about him and the Raptor faithful are probably happy that the current team is not paying Fred VanVleet $42 million to be on this team. I think we can all agree he was a hell of a basketball player. Or maybe we can't agree, but hopefully by the end of this, I'll present why Fred VanVleet is such a valuable player type and why the Raptors probably miss him, right? Because you can say a lot about Fred VanVleet, the personality, Fred VanVleet, the leader, but Fred VanVleet, the player, is very effective. Fred VanVleet, the player, is a player that should be studied as a model for analytical efficiency. And more so than anything, Fred VanVleet, the player, is exactly the type of point guard you need next to a Scottie Barnes. Plot twist, I'm pretty sure you didn't expect me to say that, but it's true. A player who guards, at least in theory, right? The Fred VanVleet we got towards Scottie's career wasn't exactly the Fred VanVleet we got in the championship run. But the Fred VanVleet we saw 2017 to 2019 is the player that we are after here. And we are going to recreate him in the aggregate using three players that are currently on the roster. Sounds like crazy Moneyball science, but I promise you it is, in theory, possible. Okay, first, some housekeeping rules. Got a lot of emails yesterday from quite a few pissed off people, a lot of DMs, a lot of conversations about my last video about the Toronto media. We will address it towards the end. I promise it will be a coherent and respectful discussion that I think, will hopefully present both sides a little bit better than maybe I've characterized it. Second, I will be on Player's Choice at 11 a.m. So, to those of you who don't get enough of me on this channel, you can definitely go check me out on Player's Choice. We're talking about Summer League. And of course, the Vegas Summer League is starting. The Raptors are going to be a really big part of Vegas Summer League. They are not, however, the only team. So, we'll be talking about Vegas Summer League in a more broader, less Raptors focused sense there. And if you want to go check me out there, I'll be on there at 11. If you're new around here, please hit like, subscribe, and all that good stuff. Likes, they cost you nothing. Subscribes, they're good for your health. I don't know. You'll live longer if you're subscribed to Pensar Basketball. Is that even factually true? Can I get sued for misleading you there? Subscriptions go a long way to helping this video populate other people's feeds to let people know that you want to be plugged in. And we're going to be doing lives after every single Summer League game, every single Raptors game this season, and also after every single Team Canada game. So definitely Spencer Dixon saying, I love that you called out the media. It was a great video. Yes, we did not get a lot of pushback on that from the fans. We definitely got a lot of pushback from the media who thought they were being unfairly targeted and mischaracterized. So we will discuss that towards the end. So let's talk about Fred VanVleet, the player. Man, this channel may have well been named Fred VanVleet Shit Takes. The last 2 years we've talked a lot of shit about Fred VanVleet, but I think hopefully if you've read through some of my frustration with Fred VanVleet, you'll know that part of my frustration was that I thought he was capable of so much more. He is, to put it lightly, he's one of the smartest basketball players in the NBA, if not one of the smartest basketball players I've ever seen in my lifetime. Um, he has perfected whatever little, God-given ability he had and taken it to the absolute 99th percentile outcome. There are very few players that leave less on the table in terms of development than Fred VanVleet. What do I mean by this? I mean, when you take the theory of Ben Gordon or the theory of Chauncey Billups or the theory of Allen Iverson or the theory of Carmelo Anthony, and then you start tacking on lazy habits, start tacking on bad diet, start tacking on lack of coachability, start tacking on injuries, start tacking on poor training, poor skill development, all of those things, poor learning the game, poor schematic stuff. Typically, and this has just been my experience, smaller players tend to be better basketball players. Nick laughs saying he quite literally maxed his ceiling. I completely agree. And so for the Toronto Raptors to have picked him out of the undrafted heap, developed him into an all-star, this was, of course, a story that the Toronto media, Toronto fans, literally every undersized basketball player could really latch on to. You might not be surprised to know that Jamal Shead, Immanuel Quickley, and Davion Mitchell all follow Fred VanVleet on Instagram. They all probably, given that he is a little bit older than all of them, probably all looked up to him as a guy, where if he could do it, I can do it. And what's interesting is that all three guards that we're talking about here in terms of Davion, Jamal Shead, the Raptors' 45th overall pick this year, and Immanuel Quickley are bigger than Fred VanVleet. They're all bigger than him. They're all longer than him. So in theory, if height and length were the thing that were standing in the way of Fred VanVleet, at least in theory, they should be able to recreate some of Fred's success. Of course, Fred is a very underrated athlete, which is something I think that a lot of draft experts and people who passed up on him in the draft really missed because he has these really solid hands and you can't train that, right? It's like grown man strength. It's like farmer strength. You ever play basketball against a guy like Fred VanVleet, you know that ball is not safe. They're swiping down on it. You know that it's not an easy post up. I've played basketball against guys like Fred VanVleet, and I don't say like Fred VanVleet as in like on the talent level of Fred VanVleet, but I mean on the physical build level of Fred VanVleet. And it's a really, really, really long night when you play against a guy who gets up into your body that way, who moves laterally that way. It really is scary. But what I'm going to say may be one of the biggest controversial things about Fred VanVleet is I don't think he's really a point guard. I think he was a combo guard. And I feel like he's maxed out his ability to play off of a lead initiator. And maybe he learned that as a 6 foot guy, he needed to go into more of the primary creation stuff. I don't think he's overly dynamic. I don't think he's great off the dribble. I don't really think he's a great paint finisher. I don't think his skills are best maximized as that guy. I think his skills are best maximized in the role that he had at championship, a guy who plays off another guy. Unfortunately, that guy just doesn't get paid. He doesn't make all-star teams. And so Fred VanVleet figured out that the business of basketball suggested or predicated that he go another way with his basketball journey. But that doesn't mean that the player underneath is not still the same. He's chosen to play a way that is better for his contract, which is what frustrated me because in theory, a player like Fred VanVleet is exactly what a lead wing initiator. If I could think back to Carmelo Anthony, right? An isolation scorer on the wing. I think back to Kawhi Leonard. I think to a Kevin Durant. If y'all remember the video I had about the 10 players I wouldn't lose if we traded for Kevin Durant, I was on 7 players. Fred VanVleet, even though at the height of my vitriol against Fred VanVleet, he was on that list. Because again, playing off of a guy like KD, you want a Fred VanVleet. Well, you know what? Playing off a guy like Scottie, you want a Fred VanVleet. But we don't have Fred VanVleet. And thank God for that. But we do have 3 players. So let's talk about those 3 players. First, let's talk about the 2 players that we can compare to Fred VanVleet next to Fred VanVleet. Now, this is crafted. It's not perfect. And I promise you that as the summer goes on and I have a little bit more time, and I'm developing a little bit more time as we go, as Pendant stuff has dried up. There's a lot of writing assignments. They have been coming. I have obligations to the panel, but I am finding more time during the days to do these videos. I promise you we're going to get a lot deeper into the numbers and the analytics than this. But just as a basic overview, this is what Immanuel Quickley looks like next to Davion Mitchell and Fred VanVleet, right? Or what Fred VanVleet looks like next to Davion Mitchell and Immanuel Quickley. And you will see that, per crafted, the best player on this list is still Fred VanVleet. He is very much, the best defender of the bunch, right? Some people could say, hey, like Davion Mitchell, off night, blah, 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 blah. But I promise you, he's not nearly the team defender right now that Fred VanVleet is. He's not nearly as versatile as Fred VanVleet is. And frankly, he doesn't have the block percentage Fred VanVleet does. And that's the crazy thing about Fred. It's just, he's always in the right place. He's thinking the game at a level these 2 other guys haven't figured out yet. And that's coming from being a student of the game. Offensively, of course, Fred is the best passer of the bunch, right? He is the best, overall creator in the pick and roll. he spams, obviously, he boosts his analytics in his own way. And what I mean by that is he goes to his strengths a lot. He's very aware of his strengths. He plays to his strengths. We saw with the Houston Rockets, if you followed the Houston Rockets, if you're a Fred VanVleet super fan, or maybe you're a Turkish fan who's a super fan of Alperen Şengün, you definitely saw that as the Rockets went further and further away from Alperen Şengün and Fred VanVleet, just like when the Raptors went away from Fred VanVleet and Jakob Poeltl, you saw other players flourish in place of that. And obviously for the Rockets going forward, it's not Fred VanVleet and Alperen Şengün that they need to really boost up. It's Jalen Green and Jabari Smith and Amen Thompson, Reed Shepard. They're young players, right? And also, obviously, Alperen Şengün. That team is exactly an embarrassment of riches when it comes to young prospects. But the larger point here is that Fred VanVleet has figured out his game. He knows how to get to his spots. He understands where he gets his shots. He understands exactly. He's figured out the muscle memory of how to throw passes, and he's figured out the techniques of basketball that, frankly, these other guys just haven't figured out yet. But right now, if I were to compare Fred VanVleet to, say, Immanuel Quickley, so far in their career, this is so far in their career. And honestly, it's not really, really that far. The real gap is defensively, but offensively, Immanuel Quickley is ahead of the curve. And you can make a case that, hey, Fred played on a really loaded roster. He didn't quite have the same path as as Immanuel Quickley, because that first year he kind of lost some time because he was down in the G League. That's fair. Immanuel Quickley did not exactly, spend his first year red shirting in the G League. Immanuel Quickley is also a little bit younger coming into the NBA. He's not nearly as physically developed coming into the NBA. He had a lot of strength issues, but the overall point here is that Emmanuel's a better scorer. He's more efficient, right? It's not quite that he's a higher volume 3-point shooter per se. I think because he's playing in an era where 3-point shooting is more voluminous in general, but the percentages are pretty close. It's 37.5% versus 39.3%. I also think that Immanuel Quickley has played just larger minutes in general. Like, I think he's played more consequential minutes. But again, per 100 possessions, it really does break in Immanuel Quickley's favor. 26 points, right? 6.8 assists. Fred has obviously got him beating the blocks in the steals department. But yeah, overall, I think they are comparable players. And you look at the value of a replacement, Immanuel Quickley is 5.7 through 4 years. Fred VanVleet's a 5.1, box plus minus in Fred VanVleet's favor, largely because of defensive box plus minus, but the offensive box plus minus is in Immanuel Quickley's favor. What is not up for debate right now is that definitively the upside argument is firmly in Immanuel Quickley's favor, 100%. How tall do you think Immanuel Quickley is? He is 6'3" with a 6'9" wingspan. It is unquestionably in his favor. When you look at his shot chart, I'm gonna take a look at Immanuel Quickley's shot chart, right? It is definitely much more star-like. Now, I wanna put preface on that. He's not a star, he's not a superstar, he's not whatever, but it is more star-like than what you would consider, you know, overall. I believe it is much more of a star. It's not exactly star, but generally speaking, to look at it this way, when you look at a shot chart, if you have upside as a star, you're scoring from a lot of different places. Your concentration is not all one side of the floor, one side of the other floor. Stars have to be complete. Stars have to have counters. Stars have to score in different ways. Stars typically should be scoring a lot of their buckets unassisted, right? If you're a star, if you're going to be more of a star. Fred VanVleet earlier in his career, a lot of his baskets were assisted, right? He was a play finisher as opposed to a play driver or play creator, right? He wasn't really creating his own shots. He wasn't really breaking guys down. He was feeding off the DeMar and Kyle and, Serge and, all those guys that they had on the team that were better than him. And he was just feasting, right? It wasn't like he was really breaking guys off the dribble and going in one-on-one. And that's never really been his game anyways. Even right now, I believe Fred VanVleet is like 59% unassisted, and that's at the peak of his powers, right? But overall, I think Immanuel Quickley's upside is better. Now you look at Davion Mitchell. This is a role player shot. This is a role player shot chart, like 100%. This is like role player shot chart. But this is Fred VanVleet, right? Fred VanVleet has expanded his game a lot, but you can see where he's missing is that entire floater range. Do you know what I mean? Like, all his game is, like, elbow out, above the break, and right underneath the basket. Like, he's going all the way or he's going nowhere. And that's where I say, like, Immanuel Quickley, to me, under Darko, can be a better player than Fred VanVleet. I really believe that. It's gonna be hard for him to replicate some of the defensive upside of Fred VanVleet. I really do think Fred VanVleet might be one of the best defenders, in Raptors history, and I'm really not capping when I say that. He's a really good defender, and he deserves credit for what he did on that end of the floor. Even though when he was compromised, we all remember the Philly series where he couldn't stay in front of anybody and everyone's picking on him. Yeah, I get it, but he was really, really injured at that point, right? But Fred VanVleet, the basketball player, as a two-way force, really hard to replicate with one player. So maybe what you do is you replicate a lot of his offensive production, if not amplifies offensive production. Because I think Immanuel Quickley could be a better offensive player. I think for all the work that Immanuel Quickley is going to have to do in the pick and roll, and he's going to have to get a lot better in the pick and roll because he struggled with that last year. I do think that he will have a better opportunity to finish around the basket than Fred VanVleet ever did, right? Just the increased length, size, he can dunk. He's got the length advantage. I think he's going to have an easier time finishing the basket. We saw a lot more of that. IQ has always had the floater range stuff. He's deadly in the floater range. So he's got the more complete scoring package. Then, he's got to get into the lab and work with his trainer and just do like dribble counters, turnarounds, stuff like that. Get stronger, right? That's the one thing Fred VanVleet didn't really have to do too much of. He didn't have to get too much stronger because he came in like built like an ox, right? He was a really, really strong player right away. And we saw that in the G League. He was bullying guys in, his first year. And then we saw more and more of that as he continued to get stronger and stronger. And so if Immanuel quickly continues to trend towards being stronger, I do expect him to be a much better player at 27 than he is at 24, 25. So I will say that. But some of that pesky point of attack, stick to guys, chase guys around, screen stuff, the Raptors are going to have to find that somewhere else. And frankly, they have two options to find that, and that is Davion Mitchell and Jamal Shead, right? Look, the cool thing about all three of these guys that the Raptors have brought in is that they all fit with Scottie, right? They're all second draft guys, by which I mean every single one of them was traded. Well, sorry, two of them are second draft guys. One of them is actually drafted by you, but I apologize. Jamal Shead is drafted by you, 45th overall pick this year, a trade. Sacramento Kings, right? Sacramento Kings traded Jamal Shead, right? So Sacramento's really traded Jamal Shead and Davion Mitchell. Okay. IQ, second draft guy, right? You targeted him. You targeted him because he fits with Scottie. Ironically, Davion Mitchell also fits with Scottie. We saw Scottie run a lot of minutes last year with the second unit. I think Davion and RJ will be a good pairing. I think Scottie and Davion could also be a good pairing because he does exactly what these guys don't do. Now, yesterday we listened to a Summer League interview with Darko Rajakovic. Obviously, the team is down in Summer League. They're down in Vegas. Scottie partying it up with Shaquille O'Neal. If you haven't seen that clip, definitely go follow us on Instagram. You'll see it on our stories. But overall, I think that these two guys, they talked a lot about securing at the point of attack, that sets the tone for your defense, right? And I fully believe that. If you cannot stop at the point of attack, which the Raptors really couldn't last year, right? They were completely hopeless for whatever reason. It was RJ giving blow-bys, Grady giving blow-bys, Scottie giving blow-bys. Everyone is just getting dusted at the point of attack, right? Then really puts a lot of pressure on the back line of your defense. And Jakob Poeltl, we haven't talked about Jakob Poeltl having one of the worst seasons of his life last year because of all the injuries and because the team was such a mess. But Jakob Poeltl really, really underperformed. And I think a lot of people in the media are just saying 25 wins, 25 wins. At best, they'll get 28 wins. I don't think they realize how much some guys on this team underperformed last year, including Immanuel Quickley and including Jakob Poeltl. I think both those guys can be a lot better. But ultimately, if you have no point of attack defense and at the rim you have Kelly Olynyk, you have no defense, right? You're putting everybody at risk, really. So what you get with Jamal Shead and what you get with Davion Mitchell are complete point of attack defenders. I don't know what else they'll be able to do. I'm kind of on the record at this point. I won't say kind of on the record. I'm totally on the record saying I think Jamal Shead will be better than Davion Mitchell. but we will see. We'll see how that plays out. I really am starting to when I dug into the Baylor tape on Davion Mitchell, I saw a lot of stuff that I really haven't seen translated at the NBA. He was a pretty good isolation scorer, for instance, at Baylor, and I'm not sure I'm seeing a lot of that. So is it just unlocking an opportunity? Does he have a chance, or is this just kind of who he is at this point, right? A corner shooter who can be a pressure defender at the point of attack. I think you'll take it either way, frankly. I mean, it's a bit of a better flyer than Kyra Lewis last year, and he has a chance to stick, right? He fits in with the culture, he fits in with what you're trying to do, what you're trying to build, and, he talked about it as well, like him getting up, pressuring the ball is gonna make other people wanna do that too. Defense is infectious. When guys are just leaking at the point of attack, everyone becomes a little bit lazy. But when guys are really pressuring up and getting up full court and really bringing energy on that end, it really does infuse some energy to your wings. And maybe it gets RJ jumping and it gets Scottie, motivated. You'll often see Scottie sometimes take on that almost impossible task of picking guys up 94 feet, which is something he's been doing since youth level. But at the NBA level, it's a little bit harder for an athlete of his size to do that consistently without surrendering blow-bys at the half court. And so I do think that getting these point of attack defenders will put Scottie in a more comfortable role for himself, which is a little bit in the lower third of the defense. Offensively, of course, having Davion Mitchell, hopefully his shooting translates. Now we need to get the volume up. In fact, whether we're talking Davion, whether we're talking Jamal Shead, whether we're talking Immanuel Quickley, that volume has to jump. Because really, right now, the gap between, Immanuel Quickley and Fred VanVleet is volume. Look at Fred VanVleet's volume above the break. This is Fred VanVleet shot chart. Just focus at the top part. Look at how many threes this guy takes, man. This is crazy. And then compare that to Immanuel Quickley, right? Like, this is what makes Fred VanVleet so valuable. It's not, okay, fine, he doesn't shoot well around the basket, fine, we get that, right? But look at the value you provide above the break in terms of providing space. Now, why are these players or this player type so great with Scottie? Well, Scottie's a really good initiator, but he's not a great primary initiator at this point until his handle gets a lot more dynamic. If it ever gets more dynamic, I'm not going to count it out, but hopefully it gets more dynamic at this level. It's probably best that he split point guard duties with somebody else, right? And honestly, that's where Kyle Lowry was best as well, right? I mean, it was Kyle and DeMar. It was DeMar sometimes initiating, Kyle sometimes initiating, Kyle and Fred. You know what I mean? It helps to have two. You don't need to have Chris Paul and Jason Kidd on this team. You don't have a Chris Paul or Jason Kidd on this team. You don't have that one guy who's like a ball handling maestro where he needs to milk all possessions. You don't have a Luka Doncic on this team. But I do believe that if you create enough space around Scottie, that he could become Luka Light or Luka like or Luka Light on this offense, right? Because again, what space provides, right? I want you to imagine that Scottie is just going one on one against Alex Caruso. Now we've seen this. We've seen Scottie go one on one against Alex Caruso and dust him and go past him and dunk all over him, right? We remember that. We remember that highlight. I want you to imagine Scottie going one on one against Pascal Siakam, right? Or literally, you could list about 99% of players in this league are going to have a really difficult time stopping Scottie Barnes one on one. Okay. Yeah, the quickness is not the greatest, and the burst is not conventional, and maybe the handle is not hot sauce, and maybe the shot package is not as sexy looking as somebody more dynamic or more naturally fitted for that role. But I'll tell you that at some point he's gonna score, right? It's gonna get clunky. It's gonna be a lot of bump. Maybe it'll be a couple counters, and then he's gonna score. And as that jump shot gets better and better, you're gonna have to give him less and less space because this really does work on a string, right? Just defense works on a string, offense works on a string. It's the same thing. It's a domino effect. If you can't shoot, they back off, and then you have less space to drive. Well, you have more space to cover on your first step, which means your first step isn't going to get you free. Then you got to go into this bump stuff, and then they're going to send a double on you. Now, that's never a problem for Scottie Barnes because he can just spray it to shooters and he can find cutters. Davion Mitchell's a good cutter. Immanuel Quickley, in my opinion, will be a good cutter this year. I don't know if he's been a good cutter usually, but Davion Mitchell has been. And I think Jamal Shead's a pretty good cutter. So you have guys who can play off of him, who can keep defenses honest away from him, and who can also do the one thing on defense that I believe he has trouble with, which is point of attack defense and screen navigation. I mean, obviously, we have seen him navigate screens well. And I think Scotty gets a little bit underrated defensively because people just keep poking holes at what he can't do defensively. So they miss all the great stuff he does do defensively. I really think Scotty can make a couple of all defense teams. He's that good defensively, but you have to put him in the right place and you have to give him the right matchups. Scottie Barnes on Jason Tatum is a really good matchup. Okay. It's a great matchup. Scottie Barnes on Steph Curry is a pretty damn good matchup. And Steph is going to have a really long night with that matchup. It's going to be really shitty for Scottie because his legs are going to be tired on offense. And maybe you need to preserve that a little bit. But that's what I'm saying. But Scottie Barnes on John Morant, Scottie Barnes on De'Aaron Fox, these are the matchups that people really point to and say, oh, that's why he can't do that. Well, cheat sheet. Nobody can do that, right? Scotty's got to learn to trust his length a little bit on those matchups if he gets cross matched, but he really is one of the best defenders in the league. And I don't think he gets enough credit for his defense. And really, like, as much as you want to poke holes at, oh, he can't do this and he can't do that, whatever. Like, look at all the things he can do defensively. He's not at a disadvantage against anybody, really. Like, you put Embiid on him, he's in a better position than 99.9% of small forwards in the league. 99% small forwards in the league. There's like maybe one or two small forwards who can guard Embiid better than he can, right? So it's like I look at the full package of Scotty as a defender and I say, man, good coaching will find a way to put this guy into a position to be very successful. This building by aggregate thing, I think it's something that the Raptors have obviously explored. I think they're familiar with the fact that they have a player type that works with Scotty. And really, that player type is a player who can sort of bounce away from him. We've seen stretches of strength with him and Armani Brooks. We've seen stretches of positive play between him and Fred VanVleet, specifically in their rookie season, in his rookie season when, Siakam was injured for, I think, the first 7 or 11 games. And Fred and Scotty were great. I think it was like 7-4. They started out the season without Siakam. And it was largely because those two just had instant basketball chemistry. It was great. And so you really do want this sort of like co ball handler stuff. I think another player that would have been great for Scotty would be like a guy like Damian Lillard, which is why I was like at least on board with the idea of trading for Dame back when it was possible. Because again, like you want to create space for this guy to attack because he's not necessarily as quick as, I mean, to put it lightly, he's not as quick as Anthony Edwards, right? And he's not nearly as dynamic with the basketball as someone like LaMelo Ball. And so what you need to do is you need to give him the maximum advantage to milk his matchup before they can send a double. And then you need to create space so that his angles are wider. And so the defense has a longer way to recover, right? When you create space, it becomes very hard to double team, right? It becomes very, very hard to cheat. It's hard to send a double. And frankly, one on one, I don't think there's a defender in the league that can outright cut off Scotty. You know what I mean? Like sometimes you get Fred VanVleet in a matchup and it's like, he can't score in this matchup. Pascal Siakam, I think there are matchups for Pascal Siakam where I'm like, I don't think he can score in this matchup, right? It's like, he'll have a really, really tough time generating offense above, 0.70 against certain matchups, right? He'll have to mismatch hunt. He'll have to ask for a screen to get the guy off of him or whatever, right? But with Scotty, really the problem is speed, right? Speed and pace. If you remember, and this is an early, early example, if y'all remember the fourth quarter he had against Brooklyn, if you remember Ben Simmons, KD, he's talking shit to KD, he scores crazy number of points in the fourth quarter. If y'all remember that, for whatever reason, whether it was pride, ignorance, or just ego, the Brooklyn Nets decided to guard Scottie Barnes like he was Damian Lillard. They were guarding him at the logo, and he was just getting past Ben Simmons, and everyone else was just getting out of the way. They put 4 shooters on the court with him. Nick Nurse bless his heart, wherever he is right now, Philadelphia. And Scottie just got downhill. And it was just over and over, and it was relentless. And it was against some good defenders. There was Nick Claxton, there was Ben Simmons, there was Kevin Durant. None of those guys are schlups on defense. I just made up a word, schlups. Schleps. What word am I looking for? None of those guys are schleppy. Is that a word? Whatever. All right. What I'm saying is, if you give him space to operate, he's going to have a great time operating in that space, and he's going to have an easier time scoring, and it's going to offset some of his weaknesses, and it's going to accentuate some of his strengths. And I do think that at some point we need to talk about how much space Jakob Poeltl is taking away and how much space he's giving back. Because Jakob is not some sort of, stationary, post up big like Jahlil Okafor, and he's not stupid, like certain other basketball players who just signed with certain other teams. He's not a player who's ignorant when it comes to the game of basketball. He knows how to get out of the way. He knows how to screen and set away, and then he knows how to keep he knows how to keep his defender occupied. But nevertheless, he cannot keep his defender occupied to the level of Nikola Vucevic or basically any stretch big. And so it kind of puts the Raptors in a precarious situation, because really the only rim protector you have, and frankly, you're going to need some rim protection here, right? The only elite rim protector I don't want to say elite, but only above average rim protector you have is a complete non-shooter. And I think that as much as Jakob is able to attack space and he is able to keep moving, and he's a great screen setter, and he's able to sort of attack the space that the defense leaves him. So when the defender completely cheats off, he's like able to score in that 12-foot area. I don't think that long term, when the Raptors do win, that Scottie will be without a stretch big. I think at some point you're going to need to, I don't know, either draft one, develop one, something like a Miles Turner prototype where, you have the shot blocking, you have the rim defense, you maybe make up for the rebounding in aggregate or by committee, right? Because you're going to have some big playmakers like Grady, who are pretty good defensive rebounders. RJ's a good rebounder. Scotty's a good rebounder. So they can gang rebound. They can help maybe a weak rebounding center, but they're not going to be able to make up for a complete, non-shot blocker like a Kelly Olynyk at the 5. But it'll be interesting to see how Scottie fits in with the 5, at the 3 spot or the 2 spot or the 4 spot with the second unit, because I do think the second unit is very optimized to him, especially if that second unit includes Davion Mitchell plus Grady Dick. Now, if it doesn't include Grady Dick and Davion Mitchell, it'll probably include Jacoby Walter and Davion Mitchell. In either case, this is a better synergistic fit basketball-wise than Jalen McDaniels and Jordan Nwora, right? And so, yeah, like you have cutters, like you have a cutter like Bruce Brown, you have a cutter like Davion Mitchell, you have guys who can sort of pressure on the ball, you have guys who are moving targets, they're smart basketball players, and you have movement shooters, Jacoby Walter, Grady Dick, Immanuel Quickley. Like this is what you need around Scottie Barnes. So everything is built around Scottie, but ultimately, if you could, without the ego, without the contract, without the bet on yourself bullshit, if you could just put prime Fred VanVleet, I'm talking 2019, 2020, 2019, 2021, that area Fred VanVleet, all-star Fred VanVleet. If you could put that player and he buys in, if you could build that player on this roster is a playoff team. That's how far it is. That's the gap between Immanuel Quickley and Fred VanVleet prime. And so Immanuel Quickley and Davion Mitchell, if they can together, or Immanuel Quickley and Jamal Shead over time, if they can together in aggregate build that up, so to the point where Immanuel Quickley becomes so great offensively that some of his defensive limitations and shortcomings on that area are not as glaring, and then maybe Davion Mitchell can just hold water offensively, and his defense is so overwhelming that the 20 to 22 minutes he does play, or Jamal Shead for that matter, the 20 to 22 minutes they do play, that the point of attack defense is so great that it kind of offsets some of that. Then by aggregate at the point guard position, you will together create Fred VanVleet for 48 minutes. And that would be a very, very good outcome for Scottie Barnes and RJ Barrett, because again, I think Fred VanVleet is very, very good for players of that sort. Let's get to 22 comments here. Zero Sum saying you are using Schlepp correctly. Oh, thank God. Bryce Lawson saying, is Vezenkov even on the team? He is, but he is not down in Vegas. This feels like a nice stream at a reasonable time. Great for breakfast, says Osmar Sanchez. Sure. Thank you. What are you eating for breakfast? It's Captain Cameralock saying Dick will be a good cutter. Vezenkov is a good cutter for someone with negative hops. I agree. Sasha Vezenkov is also a really big part of this if he decides to buy into it. Daniel Harris. Just hopping on this live. Hell yeah. Fred Van Fleet. It's Vleet is being reincarnated vis-a-vis 2024 draft off season. Davion has a chance for sure. Hopefully he can seize the opportunity, says Brutus Sparkles. Yeah, I hope so too. He's 25 years old, so this is really put up or shut up time for him for sure. Um, Roberto with the beautiful hairline in his old age. Bro, I don't think I'm even older than you, am I? I'm not that old. Um, Brock Siva saying, "Good morning. I also think DeMar and Kyle made a big difference in the making of the bench mob." I completely agree. Casey, crucial fact saying, "We need Lowry on the bench to help these guys." Well, unfortunately, Kyle Lowry just signed with the Philadelphia 76ers for what will be his 19th season. Lance saying Davion talked about bringing a sort of leadership to your thing. Sorry, Davion talks about bringing a sort of leadership to the team. Do you think he's going to pull a Schroeder? Absolutely not. Davion Mitchell is not a culture killer. I promise you that. I've talked to a lot of people who covered him for a long time. Talked to someone who covered him at Baylor just a couple of weeks ago. Um, he's a very very good person and a very good team builder. And Leo, my boy Leo, who covers the Sacramento Kings, he's talked very very glowingly about him. He was never negative about him. At some point, he did. I think he agreed that the Kings shouldn't have drafted him ninth, but really, no one's ever said anything like that about Davion ever. And I had a completely opposite opinion of Dennis Schroder. So look, I may have concerns about Davion Mitchell, the player, but Davion Mitchell, the person, is kick ass, man. I don't get those Dennis vibes at all from Davion. He even mentioned coming off the bench in his voice. Well, yes, he is definitely coming off the bench. Um, Nick laughs, saying, "I'm curious to see how Brandon Carlson turns out." Well, you will see tomorrow. And okay, let's talk about the last live because I mean I don't want to make this super long. A lot of people have said they really really like the long lives, but I think for an early morning live, this is probably a good place to partition and parse away from this Davion and Fred VanVleet and Immanuel Quickley talk, which probably could have been summed up in 15 minutes. I just rambled on for 38 minutes for no reason. Um, let's talk about all the emails and stuff. Now I felt kind of overwhelmed, frankly, by the response. I didn't really think that my last live was out of pocket. um but without completely, maybe sometimes when you speak off the cuff you do realize that you say something that may seem a little irresponsible. And did I sort of inadvertently but completely totally imply that the Toronto media has a bit of a racial bias? Yeah, I did. And some people reached out to me and they said, "Hey, that's not true. I have a friend who's black." That whole thing. Let me try to be fair about this. In my last live, I presented that there could be three options as to why the Toronto media covers Scottie Barnes the way they do, right? And I left a couple off the table. So let me include those as well to be completely fair. The three I included were: number one, anchoring bias. Number two was Scottie doesn't play politics. Number three was a cultural bias towards him being from West Palm Beach and talking a certain way, looking a certain way, dressing a certain way, being a certain way, trying to be himself. It's not really about West Palm Beach, obviously. I can tell you right now, Jonathan Mopo is going to get perfect grades from the Toronto media. Look at how he talks, right? And man, if you know, you know, and if you don't know, don't bother, right? But you get my drift, right? Jonathan Mobo is a very, very well spoken, extremely articulate person. And I don't think that your ability to articulate your thoughts should necessarily be held against you because not all of us are communications majors, and not all of us communicate the same way, and not all of us feel comfortable communicating with the same people. Because frankly, let me tell you something. I've seen Scottie Barnes give an interview when he was 16 years old and be very, very articulate with that person, but that person wasn't Josh Bloomberg, and that person isn't Aaron Rose, and that person isn't Michael Grange. And frankly, different strokes for different folks. I think I agree. I think I would tell you that most people feel a little bit differently talking to different people. Depending on who you're talking to, you're going to be a little bit more articulate, a little bit more open, a little bit more friendly with certain people over others, right? If Scottie Barnes had a difficulty talking to his teammates, maybe I feel a little bit differently about it. But Scottie Barnes having a difficulty giving a quote to Josh Lewenberg that he can print doesn't bother me. I don't care about that. But let me present options 4 and 5. Option 4, there has always been a bit of I don't want to say disdain, but a lack of favoritism towards lottery picks, high lottery picks in general, right? Andrea Bargnani was not black, he was Italian, but he was kind of crucified by this media space as well. They called him all sorts of stuff because he was the first overall pick, right? They didn't see him as a hard worker. They didn't see him as a lunch pail guy. And almost like certainly, to this day, this culture and this, fan base, and not really this fan base, but really the city has identified as blue collar for whatever reason. Like I hate to plug the Toronto Star ever in my life, but I will say one thing. There was a fantastic article which links to a 1.5 hour, it's almost like a podcast with Bruce Arthur and Dave Feshik, right? It's interesting to read. Interesting to listen to. And they talk about everything. They talk about the Richard Petty era. They talk about Tim Lewicki. They talk about him being a carnival barker. They talk about, the Shanahan era, with the Leafs. And they talk about the Masai Ujiri stuff. And they really talk about where Toronto sports is right now and how all of this ties together with how they cover the Raptors and how they feel about the Raptors. And of course, Overdrive, TSN Overdrive, can we really feel upset that TSN Overdrive has a negative opinion of Scottie Barnes? No, because let's talk about the fifth thing is that this is a very, this media space is very old school, and old school is oriented in, the pension fund, that mentality. Okay. There's a mentality in this city. Now, I want you to ask yourself a question. Have you ever in your life heard of somebody come from another country to another country and ask people in that country to believe in themselves? Believe in yourselves, believe in your city. Why do you think Masai Ujiri had to say that? Why? If you already believed in yourselves, if this was New York, he wouldn't have to tell you to believe in yourself. If this was Los Angeles, he wouldn't have to tell you to believe in yourselves. The Lakers fans think everyone wants to come there, even though everyone basically opted not to come there. Knicks fans think it's the greatest thing in the world to be Nick. But Toronto Raptor fans, unfortunately, and Toronto Leafs, I'll say Leafs fans, but just Canadian sports fans in general have an inferiority complex. And I think everyone has kind of picked up on it. Every American who's come here has sort of brushed into it at some point because you're immediately asked, how do you feel about Toronto? Do you like Toronto? What does it remind you of? Is it okay? Are you happy here? Are you going to leave us? And it's sort of like a weird insecurity. And typically it is the lottery picks that leave, right? It is the Florida based lottery picks that leave. It's the Tracy McGrady's and the Vince Carters. And frankly, maybe there's a bit of pain there that people like Scottie, typically high lottery picks, don't stick around for long. American, high lottery picks don't stick around for long. And so you're going to get a lot more favoritism towards an RJ Barrett because he is going to stick around for long. He doesn't get covered like a lottery pick who's a brat. No, he gets covered like a lottery pick who's a hometown hero, right? And Kelly Olynyk's going to get a lot of love from this media space, right? And Jamal Shead's going to get a lot of love because he's, an underdog. They can root for that, right? Jamal Shead and Josh Lewenberg can almost see Jamal Shead's eyes, right? He's just like looking up at him. And he's like, oh great, this guy, I'll root for this guy, right? So Jamal Shead and Davion Mitchell, and maybe even to lesser extent, but maybe to some extent, someone like Jonathan Mobo and Immanual Quickley and all the players that I just mentioned. Well, apart from Kelly Olynyk, are black. So it's not a black thing necessarily. It's not necessarily an American thing. It's just more like an American athlete who, we perceive as being not super blue collar, right? And it didn't matter that Scottie Barnes wore a Christie St. Clair jersey. It didn't matter that he wore an Edmonton Oilers jersey or a Vancouver Canucks jersey or that he embraces Canada or that he goes to Leafs games. It doesn't matter to these guys. It doesn't matter that he's showing up to the dugout in the Blue Jays and riding a scooter around Toronto. None of these things endear him to these guys for whatever reason, because they made up their mind for whatever reason that he is not like us. He's not like us. That's really what it comes down to. I think that's what it comes down to. So I was reached out to a lot of people in the Toronto media, and 4 or 5 different people reached out and they said, "Hey, this is really unfair, and you're being really mean, and blah blah blah. We're really good people." And I thought to myself, these guys don't even know what they're doing. I'm forming these guys as like big bad wolves, and like they've got some nefarious, calculated, plan to destroy Scottie's career. And really, that's not even the case. They're they're just bad at their jobs, and they have really poor self-reflection, and they really don't understand basketball as well as they think they do. And they have to occupy the space that they do. And so to them I say, if I've come at you super super strong and I've asked you to lose your jobs, lose your things, and I sort of, but definitely suggested that you be doing favors on the side of the street because you wouldn't be able to make sponsors, I think that is probably crossing a line on my end. So my bad. I promised that I wouldn't be negative with this channel, and hopefully, that's the end of it. It pissed me off to see the overdrive stuff with Scottie's, leadership being questioned, but honestly, whatever. It's fine. Question it all you want. It's not going to make him a worse leader. It's not anything that's going to make, a dent or a difference in anything, but yeah, I figured, yeah, I don't know. I do not trust the Toronto media. This coming from a Korean dude halfway across the world. Joshua does not know what he's doing. It's funny. My girlfriend and I were just watching the episode of Friends. Joshua. So it's funny that you call Josh Lewinberg Joshua Lewinberg. That's hilarious. All right. I wonder if we can get Ingram for a few firsts and either Pirtle or Brown. You probably, but almost definitely could get Brandon Ingram for Jakob Pirtle for a few firsts. Yes, a few firsts can get you a lot of things in the NBA. I personally would like to see the Raptors move away from trading away firsts, at least unless it's for something really, really that fits. Cameron Johnson, Laurie Markkinen. And I would like to see them go into the accumulation mode of trying to rack up 2031 draft picks. So, anyways, to those of you who are paying attention to the beginning, 11 a.m., I will be on the panel. Definitely check it out on Player's Choice. To those of you who know, yeah, it's going to be a cool hang. I'm sure Chilltown Hoops will be there. Chilltown had a lot of really nice things to say about the Toronto Raptors the other day. There's a bit of a viral video of him going around talking about the Raptors being the best development team and him being really excited for Immanuel Quickley. I thought that was super cool. It's nice to see a little bit of Raptors coverage coming from the panel, and those guys are solid. So, anyways, I'll see y'all on the panel at 11. And then I will definitely 100% see you tomorrow after the game. I am really looking forward to Vegas Summer League for a million reasons. I think that it'll be really good to see these players, seeing them all in Vegas at the ballroom that they've set it up. Okay. I'm sorry. I cannot read this language. I cannot read your name out. I wish I could. That's probably something to put on my bucket list. What do you think of Cooper Flag after his play against the U.S. national team? He definitely seems quite talented for being 17 or 18 years old. I don't put a lot of stock into scrimmages in general because one side may be going a lot harder than another side. And obviously, Cooper Flag is a very physically developed and very athletic, big player, right? So him, scoring, 15, 18 points as a, like college freshman right now doesn't surprise me at all. If you had put a Kobe Bryant at the same age, he would do more damage than Cooper is doing right now. That doesn't mean that Cooper's not amazing. I think he's a little bit overrated though, but we'll see. There are people saying that he's going to be the best player in college basketball. Wow. If that happens, holy shit, then he should be the first overall pick and he should be, he will be the first overall pick. There's a lot of marketing that goes into this player. Personally, having watched them both a lot now, and believe me, like if the Raptors season goes the way that I think it's going to go, and I'm starting to warm myself up, especially when I hear about Grady Dick starting. And, unless Grady Dick has taken a massive step up, he is years away from being a good starter in the NBA. And so I will say this, if Grady Dick starts and next to RJ Barrett on the wing with Immanuel Quickley at the point of attack, and saying, damn, you could read Korean. No, I can't. I wish I could, but I can't. Um, what is it saying? Yeah, if that's your starting five and Jakob Poeltl isn't completely bought in or dialed in or whatever, and we really don't know where Jakob is in the world right now, but wherever he is, hope he's having a great summer, but he is not with the team right now. So if he's not completely dialed in and bought in, he really is your only hope to being a playoff team this year, in my opinion. Jakob Poeltl is the balance, right? Sounds crazy to say, right? Because he's not a superstar or anything like that, but it's just because you don't have another one of him, right? So everyone else can do a great job, but if he decides to just not be himself this year for whatever reason, I mean, he's also approaching year 29 in his career. This is where a lot of bigs start to tail off a little bit. So I don't know, man. I think this season could go south real fast, but I also think, you got to try, right? Like I think what was my low side? I think 32 wins was the lowest I think it could be, and then I think 44 was the highest I think it could be, something like that. I'm gonna lock it in before the season because obviously I need to see what these guys look like in training camp and whatnot. But yeah, I mean, look, Scotty's coming out to win, clearly, right? He's got a lot on the line. He's got $41 million on the line for making All NBA, and I think that that should be a very powerful motivation. If not, winning is a really powerful motivation. I do think that, we didn't talk about it in this channel yet, but let's talk about this. It's sort of disjointed, but Immanuel Quickley's contract coming in at 32.5 million instead of 35. I would like to scrub the internet clean of my initial reaction to his contract because every new detail that we get about his contract makes me feel 100% better about his contract. First of all, the contract being flat means that, look, everything has to be judged as a percentage of the cap. I promise you, if you look at these numbers in isolation without thinking about it, you're always going to think they're over. They're always going to look big. They're going to look too big because you're comparing them to some contract that was signed 6 years ago, right? Nick last saying flat contract, chef's kiss. I completely agree. This means that you're going to pay a premium early and you're going to get a massive discount late. In theory, again, in theory, it may go the other way. We don't know. Prospects develop in weird ways. Sometimes people fall off. In theory, Immanuel Quickley should be worth about 22 to 24 million dollars next year. In theory, he will be paid 32.5 with the 2.5 as an incentives. And I don't know if I think Blake said it was unlikely incentives. So he will be $10 million technically underpaid. Sorry, overpaid next year. Sorry, no, $8 million overpaid next year. And then the next year, if he continues to get better and better and better, he will slowly move towards being fairly paid or relatively close to fairly paid by the middle of his contract. What's important for us as Raptor fans, obviously fans of the team and wanting them to have a clear chart course in terms of, rebuilding, is that the parts of his contract where he is quote unquote unfairly paid or overpaid, Scottie will be underpaid, Grady will be underpaid. When both Scottie and Grady will be fairly paid, Immanuel Quickley will become either underpaid or fairly paid. So his contract is being kind of like his contract kind of goes like this, and their contract goes like this, and you sort of intersect in the middle, and you have that perfect, balance throughout your roster, right? This would be like, I don't know, having a really old player on your roster sign a descending contract and have a really young player on your contract on your roster sign an ascending contract so that they basically cancel each other out. It's a little bit like that. Um, B saying 32.5 million for IQ isn't too bad. See, here's the thing. It's not even the 32.5, it's the fact that it's flat because the cap's going up every single year, right? So that's what we're not factoring in. Every single year, these contracts that these rookies are signing, right? They're going to go up and up and up and up, right? Every single year we're seeing it, right? Even the gap between Tyrese Maxey and, Immanuel Quickley that year and Scottie's year is a little bit higher, right? So when you factor in the type of extensions that I don't know, who would be a good example? Amen Thompson, Grady Dick. When you see the extensions that these guys sign, they're going to be even higher because they're going to factor into the new CBA. They're going to factor in for the cap that year. And so as those contracts get higher, contracts like long-term contracts like Emmanuel Quickley are going to get cheaper by default. And so in theory, right now, right, you could argue that Emmanuel Quickley is I, okay, just I don't have the numbers in front of me, so let me just make a guess that he's going to be like the 13th or 14th highest paid point guard this year, right? And he'll be probably, unless he gets way better, the 18th best point guard in the NBA. By the end of it, he could be the 20th highest paid point guard, and he could be a top 10 point guard. So you'll receive value at the opposite end of the spectrum. And by the way, you're not contending right now. So where you'll really need value is later on in this deal. Also worth noting, he becomes a very, very enticing trade asset in year 3, largely because he'll have 2 years left under team control and he'll be underpaid. So if you ever decide to move off of him, he will be an extremely movable contract in years 3 and 4. So again, Emmanuel Quickley is just, I mean, I'm not thrilled about the contract. Obviously, I'd be much happier at 27, 28 as, as, B is saying here. But, B saying saw on Twitter, he's 14th highest paid point guard based on annual average currently. Exactly. But as I said, as those new contracts filter in, as Scoot Henderson signs his extension, Shaden Sharp signs his extension, et cetera, again, that contract will look cheaper and cheaper and cheaper because it's flat. It doesn't keep going up. So there's going to be no point in which you're going to be paying Emmanuel Quickley $39 million. That's never going to happen, right? And again, I would love to know what these unlikely incentives are. Are they, winning a championship? Is it whatever? I think the other part of this that's worth noting for people who are not as familiar with the CBA is that for the purposes of the apron, your unlikely incentives count towards the apron. So it is a little bit like he's being paid 35, even though he's not getting paid 35. At the end of the year, obviously you won't pay the luxury tax, right? Because if you don't pay it, but for the purposes of the apron, the second apron, first apron, his contract counts as 35. All right. That's enough rambling from me. Cleared up a lot of topics. Hopefully it was a insightful listen for you. Thank you to the near 200 of you who've been here in the morning. It's uncharacteristic of us to do lives in the morning, but I really do appreciate it because I think I stammer a lot less. The internet connection was not stupid today because the last 2 lives has been really, really shaky. And I like doing these things in the morning, even though I spent most of the night up for doing some work. But yeah, I'll talk to y'all later, and definitely check us out tomorrow for Vegas Summer League. I believe the Toronto Raptors start out the season against, who are they starting out against? I believe it is, where is the Summer League schedule? Do I not have it here? I moved it. I think it's against the Thunder. So anyways, it's going to be really, really fun to watch that. And I'm really looking forward to seeing Jonathan Mobo. And he's been talking a lot, like a lot of, positive smack. And, summer league, don't stress out. Don't panic if, one of the wings or Ulrich Shamshay looks totally terrible. And please don't overreact if Ulrich Shamshay or, Jonathan Mobo score 20 points or something like that either. It is a guards league, though. Summer league is always going to be based on guards and guard play. And so, hopefully Jamal Shead is not selfish, with the basketball. But I mean, I'll be curious to see Grady and Ochai, right? Those are the 2 guys. They are the older guys on the roster. If you look at the Toronto Raptors roster, there's an interesting fact about it that I think I should mention as the final fact before I go. Maybe this will earn your sub. The Toronto Raptors championship season, they had 0 lottery picks. This year's roster, which is projected to be one of the worst teams in the league by most analysts, pundits, Vegas has 7 lottery picks. So 7 lottery picks and possibly one more on the way. But 2 of those lottery picks are playing in summer league. Well, at least 2 of those guys, and that's Ochai and Grady, and hopefully they look too good for it. I'll talk to y'all later. Bye.